How are you guys all doing today? Thank you for joining us. I'm Tony.
I'm Leona.
And this is Tony and Leona Live. I'd like to thank you all for joining us, and just a reminder to subscribe and like our videos. Today we got an exciting show. We're going to be fact-checking the claim that COVID-19 has killed more people under the Biden administration than the Trump administration. So comparing 2021 to 2020, we're going to dive deep into the facts. It's not, despite the title, it's not a political show, but we definitely want to start out the show by taking a moment of silence. You want to explain?
Yeah, we really want to remember always, for ourselves and for anyone else listening, anyone else delving into these numbers, that every single number we're discussing is an irreplaceable human.
Yeah. We don't want to sound callous
when
we're talking about deaths, when we're talking about cases, when we're talking about, because this pandemic's a tragedy. It's affected people on so many different levels.
Whether by the virus itself, whether by our response to the virus, like our meaning different governments' response to the virus, whether by death from unknown causes or illness, vaccine side effects, all of these things. So we want to keep all of these people in mind and remember that every single number of death from COVID is a human who is loved and has been lost.
Yep. So we're going to take a moment of silence and just remember. And we're back. So we had kind of a rough show last night. Our microphone didn't work. We went 18 minutes into the show without a microphone until we finally figured that out. But
we were using different software.
Yep.
Which is exciting. It allows us to
which
show
we're using now
graphs
too.
Yes.
So we appreciate everybody's patience and help with growing the show and helping us to make it better with every show, which is our goal. So again, our topic for today is we're going to be fact-checking the claim that COVID-19 has killed more people under the Biden administration than the Trump administration. A lot of the claims that have been made are based on a study from Johns Hopkins that was released and published, I think, at the beginning of October. But before we get into that, we're going to talk about some of the headlines for today. So, Leona, did you hear about the snow leopards at the zoo in Nebraska?
I did. I know there were 3 snow leopards and 2 tigers. This is from the Associated Press. 3 snow leopards have died at the Lincoln Children's Zoo in Nebraska of complications from COVID-19. The zoo began treating the leopards and 2 tigers for the virus last month. The zoo said the tigers have made a recovery. I guess the zoo remains open to the public and continues to take precautions to prevent transmission of COVID. But very sad that these 3 snow leopards have died. I don't know exactly if they all died in the very recent past or
I think it's significant just because, we were talking about earlier about some of the efforts that have been made or the exaggerations that have been made to the public in regards to coronavirus. We were originally told we had to stay home for 15 days to flatten the curve. And then that changed into, almost 3 months of staying at home, at least in Minnesota. And then it went to masks. We were all told if we just masked up and masked harder and everybody masked, that would end the pandemic. That didn't do it. And then, of course, moving to the Pfizer and the Moderna and the J&J, that was originally proposed, at least from the political leaders and people in the media, to be the silver bullet against the pandemic. If everyone just got their Pfizer, that would do it. And they even told people that they didn't need to wear masks if they got the Pfizer, and soon thereafter they changed. So.
Yeah, and even.
But our main point with the snow leopards is this virus is circulating not only amongst humans, but now it's documented that it's being circulated and used as reservoirs in animals. Yeah. So I think more and more, I don't want to be the bearer of bad news, but I think more and more we're facing a situation where this virus is going to be endemic, as sad and as terrible as that is.
I don't want to be the bearer of bad news, but I do think we all deserve accurate information. And I think, sadly, the exaggerations made by many people in leadership positions have made people, one, have a false sense of security in certain measures, which doesn't mean we're against the measures, but giving people a false sense of security in them is not good. That's actually led to death in my own life. I can name people who have felt that way. And then it also has led to pretty severe segregation among people based on these claims. So if you're not...
Yeah. Which leads us to our next story. I mean, that's one of the reasons why we're doing this live stream and why we've been so active is because of that discrimination part. It's not because we know for sure that the vaccines don't work or that they work or that they're 100% safe. We don't know for sure what these, what exactly that is. But one thing we do know for sure is that your individual rights and your liberties, they don't end in a pandemic. And oftentimes it may be even the most important time to stand up for it now is, and we look at what's happening in Austria. Did you hear that in Austria, they're doing a lockdown only for the unvaccinated? Did you hear that, Leona?
I saw clips of it shared by different people. So this looks like it's from the BBC.
Yeah, it's from the BBC.
Go ahead. About 2 million people who have not been fully vaccinated against COVID-19 have been placed in lockdown in Austria as the country faces a surge. Unvaccinated people will only be allowed to leave home for limited reasons, like working or buying food. About 65% of Austria's population is fully vaccinated, one of the lowest rates in Western Europe. Wow. Meanwhile, the 7-day infection rate is more than 800 cases per 100,000 per capita.
And so that's just one example. There's a lot of other countries that are putting in similar
including our own. I mean,
True.
Chase is not allowing people to work there anymore unless they're vaccinated. And even things like testing only the unvaccinated and not the vaccinated just doesn't make sense. I know. And again, I think it's a flat out lie that we were told. I think it was really clear in the summer that the vaccines were not going to stop transmission or infection. And yet we were told that for so long. And so it allowed so many people, I think in good faith, because that's what we were told. But we were told incorrectly that these vaccines were the silver bullet, like you said, that they would prevent the virus, that they would end SARS-CoV-2. And that's never been even a hope or a claim made by the manufacturers of vaccines.
Yeah, and that leads us to the next parts of our stories is that there's actually many governments and nations internationally that are starting to issue some warnings, especially for young people in terms of the Moderna in this case. If you can see this here, it says Germany cautions pregnant women and people under 30 to get the Pfizer shot over the Moderna. So they're telling people, and this is recently, this is November 10th, 2021, Tim Lowe and Bloomberg. This is out of fortune.com. And so Germany is issuing some warnings, and Leona's going to read a little more about what they're saying here. One sec.
So Germany's vaccine commission recommended that people under 30 and pregnant women should get the Pfizer COVID shot rather than one from Moderna. Rare heart inflammation side effects appear more common with Moderna's shot in younger patients, the commission said. While there's no comparable safety data for pregnant women, the group advised the Pfizer shot out of caution. The recommendation applies for early vaccine rounds as well as boosters. There appears to be no heightened risk for people over 30, the commission said. And then it says the German call follows a similar recent move in France, where health officials also recommended the Pfizer whenever possible in the under 30 population.
So that's just interesting. So these discriminatory practices are being issued by governments against people, yet at the same time you're seeing some at least some whistleblowing going on, to look into it more. A similar thing happened with the Taiwanese government, and they're pointing out some issues they have seen with the Pfizer.
So Germany and France are saying Pfizer instead of Moderna, but then Taiwan is pausing the second dose of Pfizer for older children due to myocarditis. In Taiwan, second doses of the Pfizer vaccine are being temporarily suspended for children between the ages of 12 and 17 due to concerns over the risk of myocarditis.
Chen Chi Chung.
The head of Taiwan's Central Epidemic Command Center announced the news on November 10th. A final decision, he said, is expected in 2 weeks.
So you should read this last part because
Oh,
it
okay.
actually goes over the numbers in a
thanks.
little more detail.
A new report from Taiwan's Central News Agency detailed the ongoing situation. So far, the website reported 1.1 million people between the ages of 12 and 17 have received their first dose of Pfizer in Taiwan. Of that group, there have been 17 reported cases of myocarditis, and
14 of those cases were seen in males.
males.
So, those 1.1 million administered, 14 or 17 cases
17
noticed.
cases, yeah.
That doesn't mean that there's only that amount out there. Those are the ones that have been reported. So we can make some assumptions that at least the number of children suffering from myocarditis and other heart issues is probably higher.
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting. I think some people will look at it differently. Some people would look at it and say that's such a small amount given how many doses. Like, this should not be a concern for anyone. And some people also think those reports are not caused by the vaccine anyway. So I think some people would look at it and say, I bet the number is actually zero, that these cases aren't from the vaccine. Other people, particularly people who know those who have been injured even more severely than myocarditis and know that these cases haven't been reported, I think are more likely to say, so that's what's been reported. Like you said, like at least in the US, there are a number of cases that have not been reported in any way. So likely in Taiwan, there are even more cases than
And
that.
so, we're going to talk more about the Kyle Rittenhouse case later on with our legal analyst and producer,
A
John.
big switch in gears, but
Hopefully he's going to be coming
Talking
on
about
later.
highlights.
But I just wanted to reiterate just how important this case is. The jury began their deliberations today. I just noticed that there was a bunch of outrage because the judge allowed Kyle Rittenhouse. So they have 18 jurors
okay.
that basically are present at in the jury.
Okay.
They don't know which 12 they're going to be chosen. So they have alternates, I guess is how they
Okay.
do that. So they go through the whole case, and then they have to pick the jury at the end.
Wow.
So the judge
Never heard
had
of that.
Kyle literally had a raffle box, and apparently this is standard practice, at least in this courthouse or maybe even nationwide. But he had a
What?
raffle box, and he allowed Kyle to pull out
The jurors.
the 12 jurors.
I've
And so
never
people
heard
were
of that.
outraged. Oh, how could you? But, he's picking it out of a random raffle.
Oh, man.
And I think that's maybe a courtesy that's afforded to other
The person
defendants.
who's on-
I don't know.
Wow.
But the point, too, is protesters are gathering outside the courthouse already. They were there this morning. I just saw there's some leaders involved. Jacob Blake's brother, which started the Kenosha riots, is there. And you'd have to just, at least as Americans here, we all know what happened in Kenosha. We all know the tension that is in this country right now. And to see that kind of threats and to see that kind of pressure that the jurors are under, it's disheartening, to say the least. So,
Yeah.
But we'll talk more about it later on in the show. And I noticed too, my YouTube link that I have, I'm having issues with my YouTube link monitoring the show. So bear with us. We're improving. It'll get up there too.
Yes.
So, but yeah, back to our topic at hand. So we're fact checking the claim that's been made that COVID-19 has killed more people under the Biden administration than under Trump's administration.
So the reason we're looking at that it's truly not to compare Biden and Trump. And we actually had a whole discussion about whether
Right.
that should even be the title. Because I was like, we put their names in, and then it just sounds like we're being super
It's
partisan.
inflammatory. And Trump, it gets people's, they get all worked up about it. It's not what we're trying to do.
no.
It's not what this is about.
And Tony's reasoning is that so many people have made that claim either way, and so it's an interesting way to phrase the question. But the reason why we're looking at it in this way is because it's essentially 2020 and 2021. If you look at the months in 2020 where the pandemic was present in the U.S., meaning when people were hospitalized and dying from COVID-19, that was in March 2020. So if we go from March through December 2020, that's about 10 months. And then if we go from the beginning of 2021 through October or the beginning of November, that's another about 10 months. So it's essentially equal times. And then the difference is that in between the 2 years, we got a new president, and we had the vaccine rollout. So it's, in some ways, we'll have to see in a couple years what the data really shows. But at the same time, it's a good time to look at this because of, equal.
And so so we're just going to go over and we're going to focus on Florida, and we're going to focus on Minnesota, and then Leona's got some additional data about Vermont and California in terms of their vaccination rates. But we wanted to focus on Florida and Minnesota primarily because that's where we live in Florida.
Because it's our show and we love
friends
Florida
there.
and Minnesota.
But it's also got different regions. So if you look at what happened with Florida, 2 years in a row, their biggest surge was in the summer, in July and August, whereas Minnesota and the northern and the Midwestern states, their surge is starting to happen right now. So
And
we
that's
wanted
what
to
happened in
compare.
2020 as well. Florida had their surge, and then afterwards, we'll show the graph later, California surged and Minnesota surged after Florida.
Yep.
So,
And we wanted to compare kind of apples to oranges in a way. So overall, in the United States, there have been just under 800,000 deaths from COVID.
In the United States,
between
yeah.
750,000
Yep.
in the last 2 years. So
Yes.
in 2020,
In all of-
in 2021
Yep.
combined.
Yep.
And the claim that was made that more people have died in 2021 from COVID under the Biden administration compared with 2020 is based on a Johns Hopkins study.
Yeah.
And we'll pull up just some of the basic bullet points here. Leona,
So
you want
this
to...
was published, on October 6th, so over a month ago. So keep that in mind with these numbers. So 2021 has surpassed 2020 to become the deadlier year for COVID-19 cases in the U.S., despite that vaccines have been readily available to most Americans for months. According to data from Johns Hopkins University, more than 353,000 coronavirus deaths have been reported this year, topping the 352,000 recorded in 2020. So again, this was reported on October 6th of 2021, over a month
Yeah,
ago.
so there's been
sadly,
more
there-
deaths since then.
been more deaths. So overall in the U.S., I'll close it out, I think,
Okay.
there have been more deaths in 2021 from COVID than in 2020.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay, and then we're going to, so that's the United States. So then looking at, we're going to start with Florida. We're going to look at first.
Yeah.
So these are Florida's kind of just basic raw numbers. This is
Yeah.
from World Meter. It's a popular website that really has blown up since the
Worldometer,
pandemic.
isn't it?
Is it Worldometer?
I
Sorry,
think so.
I
That's fine.
pronounced it wrong. But yeah, so here, this is Florida's numbers. This is total 2020 and 2021 is 60,846 deaths.
Deaths,
That's
yep.
the main point that we wanted to highlight here with that.
And over 3 million cases.
Yep. And then compare that to this graph here shows the total deaths in Florida in a line graph.
So if you're just listening, the graph essentially just increases over time, over the course of the pandemic. For a breakdown, there were approximately 25,000 deaths in Florida in 2020 and approximately 35,000 in 2021 thus far. So sadly,
there's
it's-
been, in Florida, there's been more deaths in
This year.
2021 than 2020.
Yes.
And it's up by about 10,000 deaths thus far.
10,000 more
which-
Floridians lost, yeah.
It's something, that we're going to show later, but it's something that we all kind of need to be looking at because, people love to bash Florida and say, oh, look at Florida, they're doing so poorly. Well, they always had their surges at a different time compared to the northern
Always
states.
meaning last year.
And so, two different.
Yeah.
But that might be true for their flu
But
seasons too.
that was
But
eye-opening.
let's not get into that at this
Sure.
point.
But I will just say, eye-opening for me when I worked in Florida last summer, I was saying that, like, why are the cases surging now? And they were like, well, this is always our respiratory season. So I had no idea that there were that respiratory seasons are different in different parts of the U.S.
And just to point this out too, is Florida, I don't know if it's still true, but they have one of the lowest case positivity rates now in the nation.
Currently.
And so that's because they went through their peak, and now the peak is done. If you look at it from a 2-year perspective, the peak, the summer surge from 2021 was much more deadly than 2020.
In
and there
Florida.
may be a variety of reasons for that.
Yeah. Can you pull up the graphs, the CDC graphs?
Sure,
Might
which
be a
one?
good
Here?
time to look at those, the ones with Vermont.
Well, let's go over Minnesota's.
Okay,
now.
sure.
So then just quickly now we're going to look at Minnesota's deaths. So this is total in Minnesota, 9,171 deaths, and it may be plus or minus a few either way at this point. We're not sure. And how many was that for the year?
So in
So we have this here.
Yeah. So essentially about the same in terms, well,
And I should correct myself because last show I said that Minnesota was doing worse this year than last year, and that's actually not true
it's not
yet.
the case. So thus far, according to the MDH, COVID cases, deaths, and hospitalizations in Minnesota are lower this year in 2021 than they were in 2020. So total deaths in Minnesota in 2020 were about 5,937, so almost 6,000 in
Yeah,
2020.
so you can see that about right. Where are we? Yeah, right about there.
And then thus far in 2021, it's been about 3,000.
Okay.
So
So how many extra deaths were there in
so
2020?
about 3,000 more in 2020 thus far than in 2021. But, and we're not trying to make this claim, but just to be ready. I mean, I sincerely pray our providers are ready to treat people who have COVID, whether or not they're vaccinated, because if the trend that happened in 2020 happens again, like I was saying earlier, and like we'll show in the graph soon, Florida spiked in 2020, Minnesota and California spiked after. We know that currently COVID cases in Minnesota are the highest in the country. According to the Pioneer Press, popped up for me yesterday, and then today a friend sent me a Star Trib article, both saying that COVID cases in Minnesota are the highest in the country. Now, this is again where I think data can be a little bit simultaneously accurate and misleading. So I see a lot of people sharing and sort of giving DeSantis praise that Florida case positivity in Florida, and also deaths per capita currently in Florida are low, and they are. Currently, they're lower than Minnesota, California, and even Vermont. But if you look over the course of the pandemic, deaths per capita are higher in Florida than in California, for example. There's also a very large difference in age between Florida and California. We can maybe get into more details with Florida and California later. So I think there are other variables, but it's kind of complicated. Like, yes, it's true. Florida cases are much lower right now. I just said Minnesota has the very highest positivity rate in the country. But if we look at per capita deaths over the whole course of the pandemic, Florida is actually pretty high. Their per capita deaths, not the highest, but I think they're in the top 10 per capita deaths over the course of the whole pandemic, even though right now they're one of the very, very lowest in terms of per capita deaths in the last week and current case rate.
And the other thing about Minnesota that other people have pointed out is if you extract the deaths from long-term care facilities in 2020, which were, how many did we say?
There were 4,070 COVID deaths in Minnesota.
So 4,000 out of the 6,000 deaths in Minnesota in 2020 were in long-term care facilities. And
that goes through March 4th of 2021. So it's a little bit of 2021
so it's just
as
a couple
well.
months. But
Yeah.
I mean, the main point, though, is that the vast majority of deaths were from long-term care facilities in 2020. They're not counting these long-term care facility deaths
stopped counting
anymore.
them
But
as
some
of March
critics have
4th. I
said,
don't know
though,
why.
that the number of deaths in these long-term care facilities in Minnesota is actually substantially lower. So this, you talk about
This
the numbers.
year, you mean, versus 2020?
Yes.
Okay.
So if you look at the numbers, even though Minnesota has less deaths this year, there's less deaths coming from the long-term care facilities, which actually may be more indicative that more people in the general population are dying. We don't know for sure because the state stopped counting the deaths out of the long-term care facilities, but
Yeah.
it's something to keep in mind,
Yeah.
when analyzing these numbers. So.
Yeah.
But the main point, though, what Leona was saying is Minnesota's case positivity rate is almost 10% right now. There's 1,300 or so hospitalizations of people with COVID right now as we speak. And I think they topped 300 people in the ICU.
Yeah.
So the numbers in Minnesota are not looking good.
Yeah.
The year's not over. And sadly, we may see a lot of people, we're probably going to see a lot of people die because all the trends are heading higher and higher. And so just to reiterate my point, the people who are in the general population who aren't in the long-term care facilities are actually, at this point in time, at probably the biggest risk, whether they're vaccinated or not in Minnesota.
Yeah.
So main point is this is the time to actually be careful.
Yeah.
It's the time to maybe limit some of the larger gatherings at certain times, or just do things a little bit safer because as one of the articles said, it's a COVID blizzard in Minnesota right now, and we're not making light of that.
No, not at all.
So, do you want to talk a little bit about some of the other data that you found?
Yeah. So just since we touched on California and Florida, I'll go over that and then we'll go over vaccination rates for different states. So, like I said, Florida's case positivity and per capita deaths now and in the past 7 days, Florida's are much lower than California's. That's true. We see that shared a lot. However, if you look over the course of the pandemic, Florida has had 282 deaths per capita. That's per 100,000 people. And California has had 182 deaths per capita. So Florida has had a lot more deaths per capita than California over the course of the pandemic. And that's because their population size is different. That's why we look at it per capita. So total population of California is 18,258 more people than Florida. And then, people can kind of make their own judgments on whether this really makes a difference. The percent of residents above 65 years of age in Florida is 20.5%, which is the second highest in the whole country. So Maine is the only state that has a higher elderly population than Florida, as opposed to California, which is has the sixth lowest elderly population. So California is sixth away from being the very youngest state in the country, and Florida is just one away from being the very oldest state in the country in terms of age of residents in those two states. So that's one thing. Do with that what you will. So vaccination rates, breakdown by state, I think is another interesting thing to look at. I've also seen a lot, and this is maybe just my feed and the people I see, but I have seen a lot of people say that the reason Florida had such a high surge this past summer is because they're unvaccinated. So it's important to look at vaccine rates. So according to Mayo, Minnesota is 61.8% vaccinated overall. That's an overall rate. Florida is 60.4%. So 60.4 to 61.8. That's pretty similar. And this is,
although the population numbers aren't really even comparable. Florida is one of the most populated states, and there's around 6 million people that live in Minnesota, but still the percentage is about the same.
Yep, exactly. And then interestingly, in California, it's a little higher, but not that much higher. California's overall vaccination rate is 62.2%. So 62.2 California, 60.4 in Florida, 61.8 in Minnesota. And then Vermont, interestingly, has a 72% overall vaccination rate. So that is significantly higher than California, Florida, and Minnesota. Can you pull up the graph from the CDC comparing those four states?
The cases?
Yes, the cases, please. So this is from the CDC. You can enter in different states that you want to compare. So the x-axis is cases. The y-axis is the whole pandemic in the U.S. So the orange and brown line is Vermont. And whether you're looking at it or just listening, you can tell that it's the very highest cases are right now. Over the whole course of the pandemic, Vermont has significantly more cases now than they have at any other time, which is interesting given how very vaccinated they are. So I think that's one important thing to note. Another thing is this shows, and we'll show the graph of deaths in these four states in a moment, but you can see the blue is Florida. So you see them spike last year in 2020. Afterwards, you see Minnesota in the green, California in the purple, and then go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, so you look at Florida's second spike, you can see that at least this is cases that it was higher than the 2020 summer surge that they had.
Yes. But actually lower than Minnesota and California's surges in 2020.
Right,
which is
but what we have to see though is you see the very, very end of the chart, Minnesota and California, and they're all going up. They're trending upward. So in trading terms, they're on an upward trend, which means it's probably going to keep going up for a while. Yeah. So we're going to see what those peaks are compared to the peaks in 2020.
Yeah, but it's important to see this because, frankly, we're not going to give medical advice, but people do need to be prepared and have a plan. And the one piece of advice I'll give is find a provider who will treat you whether or not you're vaccinated. Because if you're infected and you're high risk, you need someone who will actually treat you. So I will say that.
Okay. What else you got for us?
And then, do you want to look at Vermont? Oh, just to kind of clarify about Vermont, because I think it's interesting. I don't know what conclusion we can draw, but I think it's worth noting. Vermont does continue to have a low number of deaths per capita when you compare them to all three of the other states, to Minnesota, California, and Florida. And just in general, I think they actually have the lowest per capita deaths in the whole country, I think. I don't know about that. What I do know for sure is that currently both their cases and deaths from COVID are the very highest for Vermont than at any other time during the pandemic, which I know I said already. But I think it's good to clarify and kind of parse out the differences in per capita deaths and per capita cases and current deaths and cases. And I do think it's helpful to look like, why is Vermont's the very highest for them?
Is Vermont the most
now?
Vaccinated state in the country?
I don't know. I know it's 72%.
So they're probably in the top
for
5,
sure.
top 10
I
for
think
sure.
so. Well, yeah.
And the main point is they're experiencing their largest surge
Ever.
right now.
Ever, yeah, than at any other time. So, yeah. Interestingly, according to the CDC, 79% of Americans over the age of 12 have received at least one vaccination. Just to throw it out there for what our whole country's vaccination rate is. And then also when we're comparing the years, I meant to bring this up before, like when we're looking at 2020 versus 2021, I don't think anything's like a perfect comparison, but it's helpful to know that vaccines first, so Moderna and Pfizer first became available for the public on December 14th of 2020. So if we're waiting 2 weeks after a shot for it to fully count, December 28th, 2020 is the first time anyone in the public, and at that point it was still pretty limited. I think it was just people in high risk positions. December 28th, 2020 is the first time anyone in the public had just one shot. So of course that means nobody at all was fully vaccinated in the public until 2021. And then Johnson & Johnson was not available until February. So that wasn't an issue. Nobody was like fully vaccinated with Johnson & Johnson until 2021 either. So that's another reason why it's sort of helpful to compare 2020 and 2021 at this time. Because in 2020, essentially nobody was vaccinated. As opposed to 2021.
And what's interesting too is I've been reading the articles in Minnesota about the hospital surge, about the newest surges in cases and deaths, unfortunately. But you don't see the same rhetoric about blaming it on the unvaccinated. You're not seeing that in the local. They're acknowledging that there's many breakthrough cases.
Yeah.
There are fully vaccinated people dying right now in the hospital. So really, this is a pandemic of people. Not necessarily the unvaccinated versus the not. So,
and again, well, I can't and don't want to give medical advice. Find someone who will treat you, whether or not you're vaccinated, because it's a rough time, whether or not you're vaccinated. I'll just say that based on data, just real quickly, and anecdotally. And I'm not saying that my anecdotal experience or who I know should have bearing on you, but what I know anecdotally matches up with the data I see, or the statements that are not being made is maybe more accurate. And it's really heartbreaking. And people find someone who will treat you.
Have a plan, like we were saying, in early intervention.
Again,
if you're at
whether
risk,
or not you're vaccinated. If you're at risk.
It's more about comorbidities, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's been studies that have shown that if you have over 2, you're getting to 3 or over 3 comorbidities, your chances of having severe disease is very high. It's high enough where you need to have a plan. And early intervention, if you can catch your infection early and have a plan administered with the advice of your doctor and your medical advisors. I'm not telling you what plan to do.
Nope. That's
but
why
I think it should be
find
even
a
true.
provider
If
now.
you're fully vaccinated, have that plan.
Yep.
You don't have a bulletproof vest on.
If
in
you are
terms of
high
COVID.
risk for severe illness from COVID, whether or not you're vaccinated, find a provider now who will treat you early on if you get it, because it's hard to find them. And early intervention is important.
So what else you got from?
So one thing I have seen shared a lot is from the CDC. So according to the CDC, and I will admit when I saw this shared, I was like, that sounds a little hyperbolic. Is that true? But according to the CDC, this is according to the World Health Organization. So According to the World Health Organization, during the third week of September 2021, there were 156% more COVID cases and 148% more COVID deaths than during the third week of September 2020. So I wanted to see if it was true. So went to the WHO dashboard. It is true, but I still wanted a more comprehensive breakdown. Like, did they just pick this random week? Is this a trend? Was that an outlier week? And what I found was that overall deaths were higher in October and November of 2021 than in those months in 2020. But deaths were lower in July of 2021 than in July of 2020. So in November, it was by only 1,000, but in October, the first week of October, there were almost 5,000 deaths in October, the first week of October in 2020. The first week of October in 2021, there were 1,500 deaths. So over twice as many deaths in that same week in 2021 than in 2020. But then in July, the second week of July 2020, there were almost 7,000 deaths. The second week of July 2021, there were not even 2,000 deaths. So I don't know. I don't think it's our job to draw conclusions. I think the best we can do is share some, I don't even want to say accurate information. I don't think it's necessarily that when people share one snippet, it's inaccurate, but I think when it's not put into a broader context, it can be hard to draw really any accurate conclusions. So, I mean, I have to just wonder, were deaths lower in July of 2021 than July of 2020 because the vaccines were helping at that time?
Well, we had the Delta variant. So that was a different surge that follows a slightly different trajectory.
In the summer.
Well, just the emergence
that
of
already
it
Delta?
when it emerged, and maybe it
Yeah.
has to do with waning immunity from the vaccine, because the science and the research is showing that.
But in July, when the deaths were so much lower this year, so much, that's what I'm talking about. But if that is the case, so if they were lower in July of this year than July of 2020, was that because of the vaccine? And if so, then why were they so much higher in September and October of this year than September and October of 2020? If it was just waning efficacy in the vaccines, wouldn't they be essentially the same as 2020? Why so much higher? Like over twice as many certain weeks in 2021 versus 2020, which does seem a little crazy to me. Is it the virus mutating to become that much more deadly? Yeah. So I don't know. I think that's interesting to look at, and certainly anyone can. We talked about Vermont. We can talk about some global kind of trends. I know you talked about Germany and France and Taiwan and what they're doing there, but so age difference. So Singapore, I think I put in the a graph for Singapore in there. So again, Singapore is somewhat similar to Vermont. They have a very low total number of people who they've lost to COVID overall. They've had 586 COVID deaths total over the course of the pandemic. However, like I said, similar to Vermont, currently their cases and deaths are the very highest right now by a long shot, significantly higher now than any other time during the pandemic. So the graph that I have here is from October 28th of 2021, and their entire population, not just adults, is 88.5% fully vaccinated, not just one dose. So that's really high, really high. So 88.5% fully vaccinated in the whole population, not just adults in Singapore, and they are having their highest cases ever. Can I put that graph up? I think it's this one. I'm so techie. There we go. So it's a little hard to see the writing, I think. I guess I don't know exactly how everyone else has seen it. There, that looks pretty good. So this is Singapore. The top graph is death. I'm sorry. The top graph is new infections. The bottom graph is deaths. And I just, thankfully, they have not had that many deaths overall, but you can see the very high spike recently. Much, much higher than at any other time during the pandemic, despite their extremely high vaccination rate. So extremely high fully vaccinated rate too. So again, I don't know what conclusion to draw, but it's interesting. And really the reason why I looked into that is because I saw people sharing it. And whenever I see people share those things, I'm like, is that true? Are we missing something? But I looked at it from a few different sources, World Health Organization, Reuters, Worldometer, and I mean, I think it's accurate. So,
What else?
there
you
are a
got?
couple headlines. UC Berkeley's 99% vaccinated football team had a quote unquote major outbreak according to OSHA. I think it was 40 cases. And I am trusting the reporter who wrote this. The reporter and I didn't even send you the link. The reporter found out which of the doses this team had been given and when, or which of the vaccines, and they were given a roughly even mix of Johnson & Johnson, Moderna, and Pfizer in the spring. So that's about 6 to 7 months ago, if the spring is April and May, which may just be a sign of very relatively quickly waning efficacy. I don't know.
There's also the story out of Connecticut, the nursing home.
Oh yes.
Quite a few.
Yeah,
like,
that was
the entire
really
nursing home
sad.
was infected, and the entire
Yeah.
nursing home was also vaxxed.
Yeah, and a lot of deaths there as well. That was really sad. I don't think there have been any deaths with the UC Berkeley's team, just a large spread case count. But yeah, the nursing home, I don't remember how many deaths, but it was a lot. A lot of people died. And yeah, again, fully vaccinated staff and residents. Yeah, I don't know. Do you know if any of them had received the third booster? Because aren't they all high risk? Okay, I don't know either.
So can you believe we've been in Florida for almost a month now?
It's gone quickly.
I know, 30
It
days.
has gone pretty quickly.
Met some friends. The boys have met friends, so that's good.
We all miss people in Minnesota a lot, but
I tell you,
there
the
have been a lot of
weather
blessings
has
here,
been.
which
I didn't
is a
realize
huge gift.
Florida was so nice this time of year, especially the last couple of weeks. Like, it's warm enough where the kids can go still go swimming in the swimming pool, go to the golf, to the beach.
It's a little chilly for me because I'm a baby, but
But it was
they're
like 78 degrees today.
I know they're
You
tougher.
know, like
than
in the
me,
morning,
yeah.
it was like 60 something degrees, and you can wear shorts, you can wear pants.
and you're comfortable in either one.
Yeah, but
Yeah,
it's exciting that the kids have been meeting friends too. So.
Yeah, I'm so grateful for that.
So we're going to move on to the Cal Rittenhouse case and work on our third-party interviews. John T. Hernandez, are you there? Producer John, are you there? Where'd he go? I want to figure out how to hide this. Johnny?
Should I text him? Oh, you have my phone. I
Johnny, are
think.
you there?
Did you leave?
I think we lost producer Johnny.
Should I text him?
I don't know. Johnny, are you there? Are you on the screen? Hit the video button.
Hey. yo.
Uh-oh. Did that
Oh, I'm
just go
here.
on?
Okay, he's here.
Where's the video?
Sorry, everyone. This is our first time trying to do an interview like this. So I think overall the audio went better tonight than last night, but
We'll see.
yeah, we'll see. We hope.
Yep.
It's a lot of research to pack into speaking, to have nobody hear it, to have
Yeah.
it be
Fun stuff.
for you and me to just share with each other again. Right.
Johnny, where'd you go?
Is it us? Where's the chat? Here.
He says I'm here.
Can we give some of his background?
His video's not working. All right, well, I guess that's all we got for today. Thank you for joining us. We'll be back later this week, guys.
Hopefully with John that time.
Have a good night.
Bye. Thanks, everyone.